Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. This time around, we're turning our attention to Taiwan, a small island with a big target on its back. Because if you've been following the news, you'll know that Taiwan is watching the war in Ukraine. The question on people's mind is this: what lessons can Taiwan learn from Ukraine's ongoing struggle against Russian aggression? Spoiler alert, a lot. Taiwan is in a precarious position, much like Ukraine was before the Russian tanks started rolling in. It's a democracy that exists in the shadow of a much larger, much more authoritarian neighbor, in this case, China. And if you think that China isn't taking notes on Russia's playbook, you've not been watching this show long enough. Let's get to it. Here's our latest report.
While Ukrainians defend their land against Russian invaders, onlookers in the East are taking notes. Taiwan says it's actively studying the way Kyiv repels attacks from a much larger opponent. In their eyes, Ukraine's ability to make use of smaller units makes them more agile and harder to pin down, which in return makes them much more cost-effective. Speaking of funds, Taiwan is planning on doubling its defense budget, acquiring weapons from abroad and heavily investing in its own domestic weapons production capabilities. The drastic increase in military funding comes after US intelligence reported of a truly horrifying possibility for the island nation. According to Washington, Chinese President Xi Jinping has instructed his army to be ready by 2027 to invade Taiwan. This also follows a two-day drill conducted by China in the Taiwan Strait in May to test Beijing's ability to jointly seize power and occupy key areas in the region. Taking a page out of Ukraine's book, Taiwan mainly plans on boosting its anti-air capabilities, as air superiority leads to greater freedom of movement of troops on land, adding that if Ukraine falls, it could inspire Beijing's expansionist ambitions. Taiwanese officials also said that freedom and peace on the island should never be taken for granted, and that no one is immune to Beijing's authoritarian influence.
And now let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Both Taiwan and Ukraine are seen by their larger neighbors as wayward provinces that needed to be reunited with the motherland, whether they like it or not. And just like Russia, China has been ramping up its military posturing, making it clear that if push comes to shove, they're ready to shove really hard. In response, Taiwan is studying Ukraine's resistance, and the first lesson is never underestimate the power of asymmetric warfare. Ukraine has shown that even a smaller country can hold its own against a military giant if it plays its cards right. Taiwan has taken this to heart by investing heavily on mobile, easily deployable weaponry, things like anti-ship missiles, drones, and cyber warfare capabilities. Because if you're going up against a behemoth, you don't try to mash them punch for punch. You go for the Achilles heel. But it's not just about hardware. Taiwan has also learned the importance of a unified national identity. Ukraine's greatest strength in this conflict has been the unity and determination of its people. When your country's very existence is on the line, it turns out that people will rally behind the flag in ways that no one could have predicted. Taiwan is keenly aware of this, and they're working hard to strengthen their own sense of national identity. They're promoting their distinct culture, language, and democratic values as a counter to Beijing's narrative that they're just a breakaway province. In short, they're making it crystal clear that if China wants to take Taiwan, it's not just going to be a military battle. It's going to be a battle for hearts and minds. Another key lesson is the importance of international support. Ukraine has managed to hold off Russia in large part due to the steady flow of military aid and economic sanctions from the West. Taiwan knows that if they're going to stand a chance against China, they'll need the same kind of international backing. This is why Taiwan has been working overtime to strengthen its ties with the United States, Japan, and other regional powers. They're not just relying on a few big allies, though. They're casting a wide net, trying to build a coalition of countries that are willing to stand up to China's bullying. Because let's face it, if there's one thing we've learned from Ukraine, it's that you can't fight a superpower alone. So what's Taiwan's endgame here? It's about deterrence. They're trying to make the cost of an invasion so high that China thinks twice before pulling the trigger. By showing that they're prepared, by building up their defenses, and by strengthening their alliances, they may convince Beijing that a military solution isn't worth the risk. But here's the thing. Deterrence only works if it's credible. And that's the big question hanging over Taiwan right now. Can they really convince China that an invasion would be too costly, or are they just buying time before the inevitable showdown? If there's one lesson Taiwan should take from Ukraine, it's that when the stakes are this high, you don't leave anything to chance. You prepare for the worst, you hope for the best, and you make sure that the world knows you're not going down without a fight. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Piotr Plbenik, a sociologist and author. Hello, sir, and welcome to Eastern Express.
Good afternoon.
So today we are exploring the similarities between the situation in Ukraine and Taiwan. What are some of the lessons that they can draw from each other, starting maybe from the similarities? And of course, we'll dive a little bit into the differences later on. What do you think are the similarities between the two situations, and what can Taiwan learn from the Ukrainian experience?
Well, let's start from the most faraway look at the matter. The geopolitical look. First, there is in the background of this whole situation in Ukraine, there is a huge and complicated geopolitical game where the Western powers are confronting this global majority or global South, as China names the collection of countries which try to oppose and confront American geopolitical power, and they plan, of course, to forward the idea of de-dollarization, so abandoning dollar as an exchange tool for global trade. So this is also a matter of energy, access to energy, and securing long-term access to energy. This is what is the most important part, actually the essence of the conflict in Ukraine. In Taiwan, in case of Taiwan, there is no such complicity, because Taiwan is importing energy resources from Middle East mainly. It's about 70 to 80%, as far as I recently checked. So it's not like Taiwan is in possession of energy resources. That's very good for Taiwan, because it will not be a target for any kind of attempt for snatching those resources. So that's the huge difference. Now, when we go to the most basic level, like a military confrontation, Taiwan is obviously an island, so it's extremely difficult to mount an invasion and realistically hope that the invasion will succeed. In Taiwan media, we hear that two parts of year where the invasion is possible because of the weather. It's as far as I remember, April, May, and then October, and in those windows it would be possible. So this is like, of course, a reason why the Taiwanese military is paying more attention to what China does. But China, I mean, mainland China, as we call it here in Taiwan, they do not need to invade Taiwan in order to subjugate Taiwan, and it would be extremely unwise from their perspective to prepare any kind of military move, because it brings risk. And people with Chinese descent, as you yourself might confirm what I'm going to say right now, Chinese are culturally programmed to avoid risks at much more intensively than somebody who is programmed with Western culture. So if this situation is contains an uncalculable risk, they will not do it. They must be really sure that they succeed. And the certainty of success of any kind of invasion is very low and basically unpredictable. So my opinion, as I always repeat it, it's not possible that the Chinese in Beijing will get any idea of mounting or preparing an invasion. Americans, they would be very happy to procure a situation where China would be forced to invade Taiwan for any reason. But there is yet another aspect of this matter, but maybe you want to ask another question because I speak so long.
No, actually, I was also wondering, because one of the key aspects of the war in Ukraine is how the Western allies kind of jumped to help Ukraine. And of course, these help have been very extensive. But however, there are criticism about the West being very slow at the beginning of the war because they still have their energy tied to Russia. Do you think that if anything breaks out between Taiwan and China, the fact that so many global countries are relying on China for their production would also further prolong any substantial aid in the early stages of any incursion?
Well, we must remember that there are two major resources which are vital for maintaining military might and geopolitical power by the West or by China or by any empire or group of countries or alliance. First, technology is semiconductors. And Taiwan, in this aspect, is not like a small island in the middle of nowhere or a small island in the middle of no man's land. Taiwan is a place where there's located the most sophisticated and the most important and expensive part of the logistic and production chain of semiconductor production is located. I'm sorry for my grammar, but Taiwan is vital for Western countries and Western powers' access to this technology and cheap means of production of the most sophisticated and most expensive and most complicated semiconductors. So Taiwan is this aspect of Taiwan existence cannot be neglected and cannot be forgotten. Americans cannot just abandon Taiwan for this practical reason: access to the technology, the production resources located in Taiwan, and Taiwanese government. I'm perfectly sure. I don't need to ask them to bet any money on what I'm going to say right now. Taiwanese government and the Taiwanese decision makers are doing everything to make sure that Taiwan is necessary for the Western world. And on the other side, China will do anything to make this difference in production capacity of China and Taiwan in the aspect of semiconductors to even out. So China is investing a lot of efforts and a lot of money in order to make sure that Taiwan will become irrelevant. And Taiwanese decision makers are aware of this game. In case of Ukraine, there is the second most important resource. This is energy. Now, the whole of Europe, the European Union, is unable to secure enough energy to support because I am European, to support our production, industrial production, and support the population livelihood with energy. All the energy we are importing to Europe is coming from countries which are hostile or unfriendly to Western values and Western geopolitical will. So this is extremely similar, but in less than obvious way.
Right, that's very interesting what you just mentioned. The two situation might seem like a little bit less obvious on the surface level, but do have a little bit of similarities that we can draw on here. Back to the Taiwanese technology with the semiconductor you mentioned earlier, well, mostly known as the silicon shield. Do you think that's a double-edged sword, meaning that meanwhile it does give an incentive for U.S. and the Western world to protect Taiwan? Does that also incentivize China to make a move, seeing that this lucrative technology is just sitting right there across the sea?
From the American point of view, Americans need to acquire access or develop their own technology, which will be matching with in sophistication and level of advancement to Taiwanese TSMC's technology. The same are doing Chinese. So both sides, both enemies, America and China, they are trying to do the same, make sure Taiwan will become irrelevant, because this way they will de-escalate the conflict. This is against the survival needs of Taiwan, as I said before. In other words, Taiwan decision makers, the TSMC decision makers, which are responsible for 30% of income, which globally Taiwan gets from the export activity. Taiwan decision makers, TSMC decision makers, must make sure that they are always ahead of Americans and Chinese, and this costs billions and billions of dollars. But this is a game for survival of Taiwan, and since I live in Taiwan using their hospitality, I do hope that they succeed.
Right, and speaking of other efforts to secure the nation, recently there's been high-level diplomatic meetings between the Taiwanese Vice President Xiao Meiqing and this part of the world being Central Eastern Europe. Now, we do know that the Vice President, when she was Vice President-elect, has already traveled to Warsaw and as well as all the other Central Eastern European countries to kind of establish ties. What do you think this fits into the broader strategy diplomatically and in terms of global and regional security?
Well, there are two alliances forming right now. This is dynamic, of course, and I think the acme of chaos will happen in November this year during the presidential election in America. Basically, we need cohesion in the Western world, in the world controlled by the hegemon of the United States. So all countries which are dependent on America's power to maintain their independence, just like Taiwan or Poland, they are also dependent on America's goodwill or resources to deliver livelihood and resources, energy, which is the most important one of those resources, to the populations. So the other side, in case of West, the other side is China. China will try to disrupt these integration efforts and this alliance forming efforts. So they will try to do acts of hybrid warfare, which means subvert trust between the nations, or make sure that there are conflicting agendas. This is a very important phrase and term: conflicting agendas. Conflicting agendas. If the actors from Chinese side, which are developing an alliance of countries under the name of BRICS, or an informal alliance of the global South or the global majority, if they succeed in subverting the trust between Western countries, and if they successfully make sure that the interests will diverge from each other, this will be a great success in the game for global domination. Success for China, unfortunately, from our side, from our perspective.
All right. Thank you so much for breaking all of this down, and thanks to you so much for your input and insight. Thanks again for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you too.
Cheers.
Have a good day.
And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. Ukrainian defense officials say that controlled exports of weapons could boost tax revenues and support the growth of the country's defense sector. This move could provide Kyiv with an additional $2 billion over the span of a year and a half.
As of now, the Ukrainian defense industry is capable of producing equipment worth up to $20 billion per year. Despite this extensive effort, Ukraine's budget can only cover $6 billion worth of purchases. Because of this, Ukrainian defense industry enterprises may face bankruptcy, as all operating funds are invested in developing new technologies and expanding production, said a representative of the National Association of Ukrainian Defense Industries. While Ukrainian weapons manufacturers don't have an explicit ban on exporting their goods, active warfare makes obtaining an export permit particularly difficult.
Despite being heavily targeted by Moscow's missiles, Ukrainian gas storages will remain open for EU use, says the CEO of the country's largest gas producer, Naftogaz. He also said that the company has enough space to satisfy domestic needs and provide for international partners.
These statements come ahead of a crucial heating season, with many potential international partners worrying about price spikes. According to Naftogaz CEO Oleksiy Chernyshov, gas storages across Ukraine offer especially advantageous conditions for European companies. EU gas storage facilities are currently at 90% capacity, making the scenario of storing their gas in Ukraine that much more tempting, despite the dangers posed by Russian missile strikes on Ukrainian gas facilities.
The Human Rights Watch is continuing its efforts to bring Vladimir Putin before a judge and jury. In their latest attempt to do so, they've called on the Mongolian government to arrest the Russian president while he's visiting the Eastern Asian country.
Vladimir Putin is wanted by the International Criminal Court for the unlawful deportation and unlawful transfer of children from occupied areas of Ukraine to Russia. Mongolia has been a state party of the ICC since 2003. The Human Rights Watch says that if the Mongolian government lets Putin roam free during and after his visit to the country, Mongolia would be defying its international obligations as an ICC member. The Kremlin, however, has expressed no worries about the visit, citing wonderful dialogue between the leaders of Russia and Mongolia.
Armenia has announced a suspension of its participation in the Collective Security Treaty Organization, or CSTO for short, which is the Russian equivalent of NATO. While they're not fully leaving the bloc yet, they have suspended their cooperation with it on all levels.
The divide was largely caused by Russia's decision not to aid Armenia during Azerbaijan's campaign to retake the ethnic Armenian region of Nagorno-Karabakh. Armenia invoked the CSTO's Article 4, similar to NATO's Article 5, but no members of the alliance took action. The leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan are also due for a bilateral meeting, with Armenia initiating the talks. Armenia also hinted at completely leaving the bloc in June this year, but has not made a final decision as of yet. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has also previously stated that solely relying on Moscow for Yerevan's defense needs was a strategic mistake, and that the country will look for other partners in this field in the future.
And that's all on this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.